who comprise 25%. We use that as a vantage point to pressure test what actually drives competitiveness in the real. In parallel, we're also developing an AI innovation playbook. The aim is practical, distilling what works across government, talent, and the planning. Then scale the framework so that countries can adapt faster and build with
Hello.
starts. Today we're joined by leaders from industry, civil society, and they'll help us understand the best practices to promote AI competitiveness and innovation. Joined by Dr. Thomas Zakaria, who's the Senior Vice President for Strategic Technology Partnerships and Public Policy at AMD. He's also a commissioner on the Geotech Commission. We're also joined by Ria Strasser-Galvis, who is an International Policy Special Projects Lead at Anthropic. And we're also joined by Pablo Chavez, who is an Adjunct Fellow at the Technology and National Security Programs at CNAS. So our job today is simple: moving insight to action, right? Identifying a few moves that will actually unlock competitiveness, identify the early signals that we should track over the next year so that we understand that we're on the right path. Welcome, panelists, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to start with Thomas. Thomas, you are a commissioner on the Geotech Commission. From where you sit, what are 2 or 3 non-negotiables for AI competitiveness in systems, especially around power, compute, and supply chains?
First
of all, thank you. Thank you for the pleasure to be here. And I must say, I'm sort of amazed at the interest and the turnout here. A colleague of mine reached out and said, "So how is the AI Summit going?" I said, "It almost feels like, for those of you who can appreciate it, it almost feels like tailgating at a football event." So the enthusiasm and the interest in AI is really palpable. So I'm delighted to be here. In terms of the specific question about scale, I think the real question is that I would reframe the question by saying that how do you translate compute to capability? Right? How do you deliver on the promise of AI? It's very clear for those of us who've been in this for a long time that AI is probably one of the most transformative technology that we are actually having to deal with. And I personally would put it in the same sort of category as the impact that the internet in terms of connectivity of people, in terms of a force multiplier between many of the things. So, and then I would also say that having gone through an entire career at the intersection of energy and compute, the linkages is very, very clear. Energy and compute are intertwined. And if I look at, leading up to the AI Summit, the number of announcements of data center investments here in India, clearly the future on that metric alone appeared to be bright in the sense that you have to translate the several gigawatts of promised infrastructure. But it's also important for us not to lose sight of the fact that AI, compute does not directly translate into AI enablement without actually going through the full stack. And I, having been perhaps spent most of my career in a public sector enterprise, I am personally biased to a much more of an open enterprise because it allows us to scale. I think that if you want to bet on the bright, talented people, particularly in India, 1.4 billion people. And so open enterprise, open stack, interoperable. And to me, I think it's, today, if you were to open up your laptop or your PC, maybe some of you go and specifically buy a model based on whether it's an Intel CPU or an AMD CPU. But most of us just want to run our software and get our work done. I think that is where we're headed. Without a doubt, whether it is 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So really open, composable, interoperable enterprise. And that is something that AMD, and part of the reason why I joined AMD is because of that commitment to create an open stack and open infrastructure. But that's not enough, right? You want to make sure that the talent is there. Now, it's not just the raw talent, but talent with access to compute, to access to models, access to the relevant problems. That's important. I also think that if you think about this, if you look at where all the AI infrastructure model companies are, there is I would argue that there is a reason why countries like US, China, Japan, Europe are leading, because they have invested several, at least multiple decades of building the fundamental research infrastructure, the talent pipeline, the research infrastructure, and therefore seeding the startups and eventually the enterprise. So that is sort of the progression. And I think I am really optimistic, given all the turnout that I'm seeing here today, the excitement that India is on the one hand, at the early stages, but also there is nothing preventing. I mean, in a field that is transforming very fast, there is no, I don't fear that India is late to the party. It really means that every generation you are reinventing what can be done, and I think you are in a great place to achieve the potential. So I will stop there and let the other panelists have
Thank you.
conversation.
And you're entirely right in the sense that there are a lot of announceables from countries essentially trying to claim some quick wins, but really a lot of what we're trying to disentangle is what is exciting versus what is dependable in this process, what we could actually be doing. Ria, I want to ask you, from the frontier side model, what's the risk of getting scale wrong, and what guardrails help without slowing progress?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting us all here today. It's great to be here talking to you. I live in San Francisco and I work for Anthropic, and this is the year when Anthropic is really going international. Up until this year, all of Anthropic's compute and focus has really been on the US market. So it's a really exciting time for me as someone who cares about international policy. And so this is something that we're thinking about very deeply right now in terms of scaling for the model, and how is it going to be tied to the values that we care about and ensure that it's safe internationally and domestically. And one of the ways that Anthropic, at least, has addressed this is by creating constitutional AI. We essentially have a constitution. Internally, we call it Claude Soul. We have guidelines, values-wise, by what decisions will be made, how things will be calculated, and that's extremely important to us as we scale. We think that as things get more complicated, as we introduce agents into how we're using models every single day, and if you use Claude Cowork, you're using agents, this becomes just even more complex. And so it's a very interesting thing for us to look internationally where we want to scale even beyond our models just to compute, because that's what was mentioned earlier. We look at, of course, all the kind of basics that was mentioned, energy, human capital, but there's also, I think, another overlay that's important to bring up, and that is shared values and respect for things like data access, good regulatory environment that allows us to work there, like copyright. And when we talk about shared values, I think it's important to call out that there are democratic values that we share with countries, and that really is something that helps us decide where we're going to scale.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we have the building blocks, right? Now I'd like to move on to the builder, the government, and the incentives behind this. So I'd like to ask you, when you look at AI competitiveness through public interest lens, where's the biggest gap right now between ambition and execution, and what kind of investment or institution building closes it fast? And this is for Pablo.
Great. Thanks so much for the invite, and it's great to see everybody. It's like being at a concert. There's like standing room only. So it's wonderful that you're here. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the research that I've been doing about the development of AI around the world, and let me frame it this way. About 4 years ago, perhaps, there was a sense that AI would be a two-player game, right? Two person race, effectively between China and the United States. This was a dyadic competition where, as Kai-Fu Lee, who's one of the major early people at Google China, Microsoft China as well, suggested that that we would be living in a world where we would have two AI states, and every other country would be a vassal state to one of those AI states, essentially providing data in exchange for financial support. What we have seen, in particular, in the wake of ChatGPT since November of 2022, is actually a tremendous build-out by many countries around the world of their own AI infrastructure, perhaps to avoid that future. But more importantly, I think for this conversation, in response to the question, I want to give you a little bit of a map of what the AI world looks like from a particular perspective. So I've been very focused on sovereign AI deployments. And the way that I define these are explicitly AI projects, explicitly funded by governments, and explicitly characterized as driven by sovereign interests. So to maintain strategic independence for a country, to promote a country's language and culture, and so forth. And I focused on three parts of the AI stack. So the first is data, second, models, third, infrastructure, and with a particular focus on kind of GPU clusters. And what I found is that in 2024, there were 30 countries that were deploying 40 of these projects, pretty much worldwide, at least according to this definition. By January of this year, that number had grown to 50 plus countries with 140 projects worldwide. And I think and these are all projects that are not in China, they're not in the United States, they are in places like India. And I'll tell you that India is one of the leading countries in this effort. We call it the sovereign AI effort. There are only 4 countries in the world that are heavily investing from a government perspective in all 3 of these parts of the stack. India is one of it. As you know, there is funding for models, there is funding for common compute, there's funding for data resources as well. South Korea is another example. At a smaller scale, Sweden and Taiwan, and that's it. So to your point about where India is leading, and it's moving very, very fast in this world. And so, from a think tank perspective, like what we're seeing is the development of kind of this multipolar AI world, where power is not concentrated in 2 actors, where it's actually increasingly diffuse and distributed among many actors. I'll say one last thing. There's still a need for international partnership. There is still work with, for example, American AI companies and European entities and so forth. So this is not a closed-off world, but it is a multipolar world and hopefully a cooperative world as we move forward.
Thank you. So it's a much more layered issue here, really. It's not a technological issue. It's all of the supporting nodes that go into it. In terms of that being the builder's view, right? Let's pressure test this through enabling conditions from industry. So Ria, when governments move fast or faster, what is the most important guardrails that preserves trust and safety without showing useful adoption?
Yeah, I think it's really important for governments to show that they are embracing enabling environments, because there are many options of countries that are investing in compute where we look and where we want to expand, and they're essentially like pitching to us that we should go there. But it really is much more layered than that. Embracing of using AI within the government itself is a really big indicator. That's part of the reason why India is such an exciting country. If we look at India, it's actually the number 2 user of Claude internationally, which I think is just an amazing statistic. But there's kind of nuance to that, because the way that we see folks using Claude in India is at a very high level. They're doing complicated engineering tasks. They're doing coding. And so we see kind of like the highest level of use. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done with companies and governments specifically to better diffuse that use into more of everyday, more of just the general office worker, and having programs where the government does skilling, where the government has goals for percentage usage of AI, and really embracing that the way you do your office job every day will be changing is a key part to making your country competitive and attractive for further investment in this area.
Yeah, entirely. It's a critical factor in terms of how quickly you'll be able to develop use cases as well, right? Like not understanding or fully understanding what the bespoke model needs for whatever industry the industry needs to be involved.
Right. And whatever the like specific requirements are for that country, if there are needs for data processing, for private data, that's something that you can work out and explore when you're doing these case studies with the government, which is exactly what we're doing in India.
Wonderful. Thomas, I want to bring you in on the same question. So if there's one place where government can make it easier for responsible AI to scale, where would you focus first?
Well, so I'm going to pick up on what Ria started saying, and even when she touched on agentic AI. Agentic AI was sort of was the latest sort of framing of 2025. And I'm going to be maybe a little bit controversial and say for 2026, it could be governance. And governance not in the context of regulatory framework, which of course there is room for that. But the reality is that in order for scale, in order for impact, you really want agentic framing, agentic AI. And so the way at least we think about it at AMD is that you can think of it as both an inner loop and an outer loop, where the inner loop, where the agents are functioning at the speed at which agents can function, they're developing hypotheses, they are continuing to accelerate the pace at which discoveries, whether it is enterprise or whether it is science or any other aspect of it. Now, where governance comes in is that you really don't want fundamental changes to any outcome without a human in the loop. So, for those of you who are in your early career, maybe going through undergraduate or graduate school, the way I mentally think about it is that if you are say a professor at a university and you have this large group of graduate students, they're all doing amazing fundamental research, but they don't get to publish their work without first the professor going through and checking it and making sure that it is actually accurate, worthy of publishing, and then you have a peer review process. And so there is that intrinsic governance outer loop that is necessary before you allow the agent to go and deliver an outcome or update the data. And I'll give you, so that's one aspect of it. The other thing where government can do, and this is probably based on my experience, not only in the US, but other places where there's real advances in AI occurring, is the ability to bring public sector, private sector, and academia on fairly significant national scale problems. And there is no reason why India cannot do that. You certainly have the raw talent, there is an academic infrastructure. If you think about, you said you're in Silicon Valley, you cannot go to any company without having a lot of Indian talent and all, from technical all the way to the leadership position. So the raw talent, the academic framework is here. So now the question is that how do you get people to work together? So I'll give you an example, which is current, right? So if you look at investment in R&D in the United States, it's roughly $1 trillion a year. Okay. Then all of that, it's only about 20% of that $1 trillion is government investment, and 80%, say that maybe 1/3, 2/3, is public sector. The rest is private sector. The private sector is a predominant funder of research, maybe probably big D, small r, big D, and so the President of the United States issued an executive order. It's called the Genesis Mission. The idea is to bring private sector, academia, and public sector together. And the goal is very simple. If you look at the investment in R&D funds, is linearly increasing year over year. But if you look at the outcomes, it's sort of flatlined, right? And the reason is because it's really complicated. You know, many of the simple problems have been tackled, and that's one where AI has a unique advantage. And this is distributed, so you need federated infrastructure, you need curated data, you need interaction and collaboration among public sector and private sector. And the goal here is to double the productivity in 10 years without increasing the investment. And I think for a country like India, that would be a problem. It doesn't have to be the same thing, but a problem like that, a construct like that, with, at least in the US, they call a lighthouse set of problems, 20 problems. It doesn't have to be 20, it could be 5 or 6. That is very relevant to India. I mean, healthcare, education, food, agriculture, these are all government's role in society. So I think that is, given the talent, given the infrastructure, given the ambitions, I think a construct of bringing the private sector, the public sector, and academia in order to accelerate the pace of innovation, which is going to drive development not only in the sort of the narrow definition of AI space, but you have collateral impact broadly in really relevant areas. And that's something that I would definitely advocate.
So you've talked about, well, collectively, you've all talked about capital, you've talked about industry, you've talked about delivery, and how they are aligning towards a common goal. However, as you've touched upon it, talent and workforce and the know-how is something that is lagging behind and something that needs to catch up. My next question is for you again, actually. You've been thinking about this, obviously, in your professional life, but also as a commissioner of the Geotech Commission. In the most practical way to expand and diversify the AI workforce quickly, while still building deep capability, what works in training, in education, and institutional capacity? And I know that's a very, very big question.
Without a doubt. And look, that at the end of the day, you have to take this from theory to practice. And, you know, just a couple of days ago, AMD, you know, for the India AI Summit had a hackathon, right? We thought we will have a few hundred, there were like 1,000 registrations, right? And it was last night at dinner, people were saying that the talent, the quality of the problems, the quality of solutions were simply amazing. It is on par with the best that you can see anywhere. So one of the things that we took away from that interaction is that there is really a dearth of ease of access to the computer infrastructure and making that available and incentivizing the talent, the students, to really take their ideas and test it out and practice that. We were having a conversation earlier. The reality is that not every problem requires trillion parameter models. There are a number of really important things that you can do, but just by downloading a pre-trained model with weights, and then you can fine-tune to your problem. And today, the AI PCs that you can buy, that is very, very competitive, will allow you to do certain things. So there are a number of ways. There's no one particular way, but also having certificate programs. So rather than going through you have to have training at the pace and scale of AI. So you don't want somebody to go in for a 4-year, AI training program. So giving access to compute, having structured programs, and also creating an environment where people can thrive, I think is very, very important.
Yeah, and putting it in people's hands, right? Because at the end of the day, you don't need to be a computer scientist to be able to engage with this technology, and you shouldn't necessarily be a computer scientist because it's a very narrow field in what we're trying to expand.
If I could add on that, just that was Anthropic's experience. Anthropic released Claude Code over a year ago, of course, aimed at engineers, trying to make their work easier. And so if you're an engineer using Claude Code, it does make coding so much more accessible. But actually, we noticed that people were using Claude Code for a lot more than just engineering and software questions. They were using it for their everyday research, for doing work on their computer that went way beyond just this one area. And so it's actually incredible. In just 10 days, Anthropic put together Claude Cowork, which is, kind of just expands that capability to do agentic work, essentially have a whole team that's working for you at the exact same time to help do any of the regular analysis that folks do in their normal day-to-day. And I think that is just increasing this accessibility, because at first, okay, you didn't have to be a coder to be able to code. But now it's even taking that further. You could just use audio, you could talk into Claude Cowork, and in just a few minutes, you could have something that you would need a whole team to have been researching for a week. And it's just, I think the entry is going to continue to go down and down as we find ways to make this even more useful, even just more almost seamless, suggesting what you should be doing after seeing how you've worked for a day or so, and really making it easier for folks to use it, maybe not even having any technical skills at all, maybe not even having that much literacy, just being able to talk into your phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a loop back mechanism where you'd be surprised what you learn from the people who are using your applications. I want to move on to what good governance looks like, and this is for you, Ria. What does right-sized governance look like when please don't put down your microphone. What does right-sized governance look like when your goal is trust and speed, and how do you avoid both regulatory gaps and accidental constraints?
Yeah. Anthropic is a member of a lot of self-regulatory agreements. And I think that is really great, especially the ones where you see industry coming together to commit to things like doing more multilingual training. That's a great example, and I think that's something that we're all working towards that makes our models more appropriate for the places where we want to grow. And that helps with our ability to do testing and ensure that our models are safe in many different languages. So there's a lot of work that just within industry is happening and moving so much faster than, quite frankly, you could come to an agreement with the government on. Just at Munich Security Conference, Anthropic signed an agreement that also Microsoft was on about a trusted tech stack. And I think that's a really great example of something that can help move governance forward, but was agreed to by industry.
Can I ask you, do you think that's is that a trend that you're seeing? So I guess what I would say about all this is that a couple of years ago we were having this debate and discussion about the European AI Act, right? And the question about whether the Europeans were over-regulating too early, to the negative effect on kind of like their own technology sector broadly and their AI efforts specifically. And so from kind of a public policy and political perspective, it seemed that perhaps the governance discussion was kind of going down in the list of priorities, and that what was going up was building up national capacity and so forth. But perhaps really kind of like what we're seeing is more kind of experimentation within companies, and also alliances among companies to kind of figure out like what should be kind of like what a trusted stack should look like, and then governments as well on their own as they are kind of building out their own infrastructure to kind of think about what that governance stack should look like, right? So I mean, I think that's kind of what I'm seeing, and I'm wondering if you all see the same thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Europe has realized that they unintentionally were kind of hampering growth that they actually wanted to enable, and so they've really pulled back and even put a pause on some of the most restrictive regulations that we saw there. But yeah, the collaboration between the labs is really incredible and really creative, because I know at Anthropic and many other labs we're extremely seriously concerned about the potential risks in the future and right now that already exist. And quite frankly, I think sometimes we're trying to convince governments to be as concerned as we are. So we're taking it quite seriously.
I mean, I think that there is a fine balance between regulation. That's why I use the word governance intentionally. We don't know enough yet to regulate. So there is clearly a role for regulation, and I think understanding the opportunities and challenges, and that really comes through these kinds of, part of the reason why we are here in this forum is to really focus on some of these issues and hopefully inform ourselves and policymakers about the striking the right balance for some of these things. I also want to say that, there is as an infrastructure, as a company that provides the fundamental infrastructure for AI, there are the motivations for hyperscalers, model companies, sovereign AI clouds, public investments. They are both aligned, but also different. Yes. And so it's really important to really understand the role each play and make sure that progress is made through intentional alignment. Now, there's a lot of over-indexing in terms of compute infrastructure simply because it turns out that it is the easiest thing for people to grasp. And, for having lived in the public sector, it is always easy to go talk to a congressman, talk about infrastructure, people get it. But models, regulations, these are all complicated things. But I would say, since we are here, and to me what is fascinating is that having been part of driving the infrastructure, and particularly AI, from the lab side, working initially with NVIDIA and then AMD and so on, in fact, sort of have that ringside view of how things have evolved, it still is kind of impressive. That's an understatement for me to say that, it took us 10 years to lay out a goal for delivering an exascale system for 20 megawatts. People said it couldn't be done, etc. Right? Why that's important? Because as we build this out, we want to make sure that we have to be as efficient as possible. But today, there's a single rack of Helios sitting in the show floor that gives you one single rack, 2.9 exaflops in a single rack. And so the compute capability will be there. Yes, we have to plan, we have to work at on that. But I think compute, you shouldn't believe that somehow things are going to stop. If there is anything, it's accelerating. So what is really interesting is, we really stayed in the model domain, but if you think about it, it's an exciting space for AI, it's physical AI, right? It's really out at the edge. And imagine if you have the same kind of compute capability that today is in this one rack that is available just in a couple of years out in the edge. There are amazing things that can be done, particularly in a vast country like India. So I will just end my comment by saying that much of India is in rural India, and AI can be a great enabler of rural India in tackling problems. And so that is both an opportunity from a policy point of view, but it's also a great opportunity for creative ideas, startups, new businesses, which then can be developed in India, from India, for the rest of the world. And so I think this is an exciting time for India, and we certainly, as AMD, are really looking forward to be part of the journey.
Thank you. I want to circle back to Pablo on this question, actually, because since you brought it up, if we're serious about competition, we need to take into consideration AI or allied alignment in the AI stack. What does that look like in terms of leverage points, and where should we be starting there?
I think that it's such a good question, because it is one of the critical things that I think all of us are going to be facing as AI systems are built around the world. So when you talk about allied countries, I think about both traditional allies, partner countries. I think about, for example, the U.S.-India relationship, and I think that one of the points, there's a couple of points of both potential alignment and potential friction. So the Indian government and Indian government officials have long been concerned about the idea of both AI and other tech services, cloud services, and so forth being cut off. So if you have a foreign cloud provider that, perhaps because of foreign government pressure, those services would no longer be available in India. And that's one of the things that drives, kind of like the sovereign movement. Again, it's not the only thing. This is not a monocausal, situation, but that is a driver. Interestingly, on the other side, you see a government like the United States starting to embrace sovereignty explicitly. The White House has been talking about this for months, and so I think that there is this question and opportunity to find what sovereignty means among partners and allies. And is it sovereignty, or is it a sense of solidarity? Is it partnership? I don't think that it is exclusive, but I do think that there are points of sensitivity. So, for example, intelligence data, right, or intelligence applications, military data, military applications, where perhaps that does need to be protected more carefully, not subject to The second thing is that if India reaches its promise of AI development through Sarvam and Barajan and all these other models that are being developed and all the cloud infrastructure that's being developed, eventually, maybe sooner than later, India will become an exporter of AI. If it becomes an exporter of AI, how does that happen? Is it going to be in the same way that DPI is starting to be exported? Will there be AI DPI, digital public infrastructure? And how would that interact, or will it interact with, for example, the American AI export program, which is about exporting the American stack that is often proprietary. So these are, I think, the opportunities and the challenges for among government friends, among government partners, to really look at this trend and start to figure out what this world is going to look like. Again, as power and capacity is not concentrated in just two actors, as it becomes, something that's more of the world.
So what I'm hearing is that competition is delivery at the end of it. It's delivery across a bunch of different domains. I want to bring an additional voice into the room. So we have here Abhishek Lahiri from.
So if you can grab a mic, Abhishek. Abhishek, when you look at adoption at massive scale, what is the single biggest bottleneck to getting AI-enabled services to millions of people?
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here. I think, look, from India's context, I think Thomas touched upon it slightly, is the penetration of the AI services at the ground level, in the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, where even today, basic understanding of AI, its risks and its harm is absolutely misunderstood or not clearly understood. And a lot of awareness work is going around that. So I think if somebody has to really scale, the regulatory frameworks are in place, and government has made it very clear that the baby has to walk itself. We will only pitch in when there are issues around deepfakes, misinformation. So one, keep reinforcing and keep pushing the ecosystem to invest more in upping their commitments towards promoting awareness at the tier 2 and tier 3 levels. And I feel strongly that scaling of AI is not the issue. It is only when the governance frameworks which are embedded in the day-to-day thought process of the boardroom leaders, I think that's what has to evolve in parallel along with the regulation. So overall, I would say the push for the DPI and integration of API, which we are still trying to visualize how it's going to pan out, but the building blocks are already in place. It's more about the absorption, the penetration, because there are use cases for small businesses which stands to be unlocked. There are thin files which needs to be addressed. And the way the government is visioning here, the inclusivity of the AI, it will only percolate when the clear understanding is there at the ground level. And that's what the success should ideally look like for a country like India. Yeah.
Thank you. We've covered a lot today. We've also cracked open quite a lot of really large topics that we didn't get a whole lot of time to discuss, but thank you all for engaging on this. I want to open it up to the audience because I know that we have a lot of questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question. Right there.
Hello, my name is Shruti Agarwal, and great panel here, right? And one of my questions was that we spoke about how AI needs to be scaled across a nation with a huge population, right? And like he rightly mentioned, the problem is education of AI. People don't know how can they use it or how it would be misused for them, right? Now, when it comes to roles of people, for example, business analysts, right? Now, these people aren't really doing the hard coding or the technical major stuff. They're the ones who are translating, right? Making the business stakeholders aware of what action can they do. So, what is the future for that kind of sector of personnel, and not just in like corporate, but those are the people who really make the impact, right? Create that transformation. How does the future in AI look like when companies are coming investing in India and for Indian startups to scale? So if my question got through, that's what I want to ask.
Well, I could answer a bit of that, actually taking from my experience in my prior role. I was working at JP Morgan Chase as executive director for AI policy there. And really the focus was, how do you get all the folks who work at JP Morgan Chase doing a whole range of things, but generally not doing so much engineering, to use AI and to embrace it. And it was a struggle even within a US company, but what I saw that was extremely important was support from the very, very top. The CEO talking constantly about how important it was to learn AI. And then we actually had kind of internal programs to get people excited and to think that AI was their job. Even if they work in HR, why would they take an afternoon to go learn about some technology? Well, because their boss was actually going to think that this was a positive thing. And I think it's a huge just change of mindset of what does your job entail. You should constantly be learning in small bursts. And I think that is the big change that we all have to embrace, that learning is now for the rest of your life. Learning is something that your employer should support, and it's something that you need to do to enable to become more competitive. And I think one of the great kind of like stereotypical phrases that we've heard is that, AI isn't coming for your job. Someone who knows AI better than you is coming for your job.
Definitely. So let me probably answer by asking a question, not expecting an answer. But when I think about India, I actually have a slightly different point of view than say coming from the US, because you are a very young country, right? So people are much more comfortable with technology, and to some extent, if you think about, much maligned, often used word of AI factory, etc., the reality is that you can deliver these capabilities much more easily to tier 2, 3, and 4 cities than building, big brick and mortar kind of infrastructure. So you have a young population, much more, attuned to technology from what I can tell, and the ability to deliver. So I think these are all. The question is really an opportunity to reframe that as a policy action to say, what can India do in order to sort of diffuse this capability much more broadly, given your demographics and given the opportunity.
Yeah, you're entirely right in terms of there's an apprehension in the U.S. towards, or distrust towards certain technologies, especially if people feel like it's going to displace them in their job and they're not going to have a fallback. That is something I don't see here as much, where it might be a generational thing. You're entirely right. And the fact that you have a lot of a lot of digitized services as a result relative to the United States. So you are engaging on a day-to-day basis with a digital world and digital services coming from the government. So there's a bit more of a trusting environment, and therefore a willingness to engage in a way that in the US we have to get over that hump a bit. Yeah.
We are finding that there's a lot of competition as far as these, for example, Anthropic is coming up and ChatGPT is coming up with their own versions every 6 months, every 3 months. So do you think that there will be a erosion of, what we call goodwill, reputation as such? Because it will become a lot more about, what you call who's running fastest rather than who is serving with the best, the most optimized way for power sector, for education.
Yes, it is absolutely a breathtaking race that is happening right now amongst all of the leading labs. I don't see that changing at all in the future. In fact, the race might speed up. Models are being released all the time, and also new applications of how to use the models. So I'll give you an example that might get to your question. Claude for Finance and Claude for Healthcare are two recent product releases that we've done, and they specialize the way you're using the tool if you work in finance, for example, so you have access to proprietary data, you're able to do Excel calculations in a way that you need to for your job, and I think that will be the future along with increasing rounds of new releases. I don't see that changing anytime soon, and the competition is really defined by this exponential growth that we've seen to be actually extremely consistent in terms of compute capabilities, metadata. We're going in the increases we've seen due to other aspects like reinforcement learning. So this is how we're going to experience technology, just an ever increasing pace of releases, and then an increasing personalization for the exact use you need for the industry you're in.
Yeah.
It's competition. Thomas Jackal. I appreciate your statement that. Hello. Yeah, appreciate your statement that there is a young population in India who are contributing too much here, but our major issues. We are tier 2, tier 3 cities. Our major issue is that we don't get these high performance computing solutions from AMD. I don't see AMD is not aggressive in India in providing, say, processor like this Threadrippers with NVIDIA cards, multiple NVIDIA cards, where we want to use the systems with power optimized workstations with the 8 processors, 8 GPUs plus 2 Threadrippers or new generation processors. I'm not getting the quote from OEMs.
Listen, we should talk after this. We'll be So I think I would just say that we are motivated to make sure that you have access to our best GPUs, and we'll continue to work at that, and we will follow up with you.
Stick around.
Yeah, thank you. But we all understand. Yes. So, we talk about AI literacy, AI access, and of course the impact. But how do you really measure that? Ultimately the theme is welfare for all, happiness of all. So far, there are metrics, and this is not enterprise value of a company. It's not GDP of a country. It's beyond that. So how do you begin to measure some of this so that, we know the progress from vision to impact, but how do you quantify that?
I'll let them jump in a second, but so I've had quite a few roles in government, both in the U.S. government and in the Australian government, and that is perpetually one of the hardest questions to answer for any government. Is how are you quantifying impact for citizenry, right, on any services that you are providing for them? So given that we're very, very early stages in what the potentiality of this technology, or how much it can transform people's lives, I don't think that the metrics are quite there yet, because people are trying to figure out how they can enable this technology, how they can use it in sectors to accelerate people's the benefit towards their citizenry. But I'll say that from like my former U.S. government and former Australian government hat. Would you like to add to that?
You have more questions?
Yeah.
One question.
Yeah, we're done. Okay. So sorry, everyone. And thank you for the eagerness for the questions. I'm happy to stay back and have a couple of conversations. But thank you to the panelists. And thank you, Abhishek, for your intervention. And thank you all for joining us today.
Look here, sir. Smile. Look here. Please. Look here, sir. Thank you.
My question from panel is how AI will disrupt the stock market, money market, and how AI will emerge in finance sector.
Hello, I'm so sorry, just 1 second. We'll take in a picture, we'll go in outside and then you can have your conversation. Yeah, just okay.
What are we doing? Okay.
How was nice meeting you? I'm Manohar. In fact, we are multiple processors of EMG. But this is what I find
We should.
And Thomas is doing a deal.
Sorry.
One more.
Look here. Smile, sir.
I have a request to stay outside and then you can have a conversation. I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.